Good afternoon for those of us in Ottawa and Canada tuning in at 1:30 on September the 4th. Welcome to you and to all those who join us subsequently through the CACOR channel. Art Hunter is well known to almost anybody who's a member of CACOR. But let me just remind those and those who are joining us for a first time, perhaps, Art is an engineer. He's not just an engineer. He's an entrepreneur. And I don't mean that strictly in a business sense. He gets things done. If you thought that art of the possible was the phrase, this is art of the get it done phase. He was responsible for leading the design, construction and delivery of the Canadarm, which was Canada's ticket to the United States space program. Art's passion for many years has been the Manotick Microgrid, which he'll be telling us about. And he's going to explain not so much the technical facets, which he's done in previous presentations, which you can find on our YouTube channel, but he's going to be talking mainly about the social and financial benefits that he's proven to occur in the years that he's been running it. So Art, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about Project Payback, which was really put together by myself and David Head, and I'm delighted to hear that David Head is participating in this from Ecuador. And we will be talking about a community virtual power plant and the policies associated with making such a thing happen in your community. And of course, the intent is to describe to you all of a virtual power plant, and well, in fact, what they are and how I am trying to mimic what they are, and to actually, by doing, try and understand the intricacies as how they work, as well as what the benefits are. And interestingly enough, some interesting financial benefits have come up, and I'm going to give you some actual data that says what a good idea this is, and all this benefit comes from what I term energy trading, and I'll talk quite a bit about that. And what makes this all happen, of course, is a policy that has been brought in by the Ontario Energy Board called the ultra-low overnight electricity rates, and I call that ULO, U-L-O, and as a short form from here on in. What we're looking at in Ontario's grid, and it's happening pretty well around the world, and whereas there's an ever increase of demand for energy, and in Ontario it's projected to be at 2% a year right out to 2050. This is driven by this electrify everything movement. Consumers are very, very knowledgeable and aware of what's going on, and they're interested in, of course, cost savings. We have a demand for more energy efficiency and improved reliability. And of course, the regulatory bodies are all getting on board and saying we have to do something to address this disruption. And VPPs, or virtual power plants, seem to be systems that are responding globally to this. One of the considerations is, of course, nuclear energy that people constantly bring up. The downside of it is, of course, a nuclear generator is either on or it's off. You cannot vary it by a great amount, and so it has a fixed output, and and you therefore must be able to have something, some load somewhere to go off and absorb that energy that's being produced when the demand is low, and but one needs some flexibility when in fact the demand does jump around as it does. So one of the things, of course, is one says, why don't we move household demands to after peak hours to help absorb some of this excess nuclear energy? And of course, another good idea is to have home and utility batteries spread around the province and homes around the province as well to help smooth this energy demand to match the supply. So we looked at a possible pilot project, and one could set one up just anywhere within the province. And I just want to indicate that the intent of this presentation to explain how VPP works and the benefits that accrue. Of course, the main considerations are affordability, reliability, resilience, and decarbonization. But we're going to focus in on affordability because the other three just come along for the ride because they're all joined at the hip. And so talking about affordability means you get the rest for nothing. And a VPP is tagged the energy system of the future because what it does, it consolidates and streamlines customer clean energy. And in the process, it reduces strain on the grid because in essence, a VPP because it's local, it doesn't mean that you do not, or it means that you don't have to draw the energy from some distant generating station. And that reduces the strain on the transmission and distribution networks. It also has reduced the demand for growth. And typically, VPPs would be controlled by the utility to help shape the peak load, and in fact, they would absorb the cost savings. But financial benefits really accrue at three levels, and I have a microgrid which I'm operating as a VPP, and I'll explain what that all means in a second. And in the US right now, they're paying those who contribute as distributed energy resource owners or microgrid for each kilowatt hour that is delivered, and that of course is controlled by the utility. And of course, the benefit comes to the utility because they can delay upgrading the infrastructure as demand growth is reduced. And of course, what this means in the third level is all customers can get a reduction in electricity cost escalations, i.e. the rate at which it grows, and maybe even bring it to growth to a halt. And if things work out very well, actually reduce the cost of delivery of power to the home. So even if you do not participate directly, you can in fact potentially see a benefit. And this is quite established technology, and there's some 2,000 of them that exist around the world, and it's been estimated that this represents somewhere between 30 to 60 large nuclear reactors. and hence virtual power plants. And there's some of the places where there is existing and expanding virtual power plants. And we of course have a one-page description as well as a SAMRAT generated YouTube, which is a 3-minute video down here at the bottom. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you go and do that. It's in 3 minutes he's captured all the messages which I'm trying to deliver here. Now, what is a microgrid? This is always a good question. And how does that differ from a virtual power plant? And these terms are kicked around and often confused. I'm going to describe what a microgrid is first. There is a central controller within a microgrid, and it has, renewable energy. And here we got some solar, we got some wind. We have a battery for energy storage. Some of them have other generators. Some of them have combined heat and power. You have included in there as part in the microgrid controller is EV charging. We have other home loads which are there being serviced by all these energy sources. There's commercial and industrial buildings, and there could be communities like hospitals and other institutions. Now, every microgrid doesn't have to have all of these, but some of them typically you want to have some generating source as well as some storage and some loads. Now, and this microgrid is connected to the utility. The thing that's really unique here is where this X is, and that's the ability of the microgrid to, in fact, island itself, cut itself off from the utility, and so it becomes invisible to the utility. The utility doesn't have to meet any of the demands, and it can't absorb any of the excess energy either. And this little X is the thing that really differentiates between a microgrid and a virtual power plant. With a virtual power plant, it's always connected, and utility then can control down to the micro level all these items. And so I do want to talk about my microgrid. It has rooftop solar arrays at 5.5 kilowatts or kilowatts maximum production. 3 Tesla Powerwall batteries, NMC batteries, to give 40 kilowatt hours of storage. I have 2 EVs, a Tesla Model 3 with 80 kilowatt hours of battery storage, and Mitsubishi with only 14. I have a ground source heat pump for shelter heating and cooling and generating hot water. And of course, I use the Tesla Powerwall control system, which has a very capable smartphone app. And just want to make a comment that clearly most homes are not this well equipped, but they could be. Now, one of the things that David Head and I discovered almost by accident, that his design of his house, which is just in the same neighborhood, built by the same builder about a year apart, and same design, and he has kept meticulous records since he moved in, and I have records since I started this up. And so that gives us an excellent opportunity to have living before and after pictures, cost pictures of what's happening, and therefore we can see things happening in real time as conditions change. Because typically the weather is changing all the time, but it's changing equally on both our residences as is any of the connections we have to Hydro One, where the two of us are are lockstep in all the external forces. All our boundary conditions are changing together. And and so we call the microgrid home and the traditional home. And and of course, David has maintained all his costs with regards to electricity, natural gas, and gasoline. And with my microgrid, I've only have electricity utility costs because I don't have any fossil fuels. Now, in December 23, and this is rather important, that the Ontario Energy Board came along and said that the ultra low overnight energy rate is going to come into effect, and this opened up the possibility then that I could mimic what the microgrid is doing and pretend that it was in fact a virtual power plant, and in order to, you know, save money using energy trading to and from the grid. And in fact, I end up getting energy credits, which are provided to me by my utility, Hydro One, and I save them up in the summer and to use them in the winter. And of course, this then opens up the opportunity to optimize how I'm going to trade energy with the grid. Now, here's a nice graphic of the traditional home, the blue line, and these are David's costs, and you can see how they've been peaking over the years during the winter. And the red line is, of course, the microgrid, and I was constrained during those years up to December 2023, and therefore I was making money in the summer, but it was costing me money in the winter. And so you can see it peaking over these 6 years that are shown, with peaks occurring during the winter, and they correspond, of course, with what David was seeing as well. Only his costs were fixed almost, you know, it's almost a straight line. So we decided to put these together and say, okay, can we aggregate these or have them accumulate over time? And clearly this ended up with a very interesting graphic of the traditional home, which is almost a straight line, as you can see. And here I was actually saving money with times during the winter when I had to actually pay some money out. But aggregated, or we take a sum over the years, and there was a $38,000 difference. And of course, people always want to know, and it cost me $22,000 to install the 5 kilowatt of net metering solar arrays. And of course, there was, as I've said, some significant earnings in the summer and costs in the winter. And over time, the energy earnings, what I sold, far exceeded the cost of buying. And hence the line with the negative slope on the last graphic. And of course, the traditional home has far less seasonal variation, but always has a cost without any earnings. Now along comes the ultra low overnight energy rate structure, and I don't expect you to read and memorize this, but there are in fact 4 different rates, and you can see that they're applied on the weekends and on holidays and weekends differently. But what is important is they have a common, the blue here, of the ultra low overnight rate of 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Whereas if you look at the on peak, the purple area here, it's 28.6 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're talking here a 10-to-1 ratio, which says, boy, it's in your best financial interest to not consume energy here and move it over to consuming energy at night. But also take a look at mid-peak, the yellow area. I mean, that's 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And looking at 2.8 cents, that's roughly, 4-to-1. And so it's 4-to-1 where you can, if you take energy from here and move it over to the blue, that's a good thing to do as well. Let's take a look at the off-peak on the weekends. Well, it's 8.7 cents compared to 2.8. That's almost 3-to-1. So you say, okay, for every kilowatt hour I can take out of the green area and move it into the blue, it's a good idea. So that was the objective that I set out to do, say, let me take advantage of that. And in fact, what happens is we get three types of time shifting, which I call, of course, energy trading, which is the same as buy low and sell high, just like the stock market. And but we do have daily time shifting, which I've just described, to move things, all household loads out of the peak high rates. And I have another term which I call rate shifting, which, for example, my EV charging, I have it set up such that, using timers and other techniques, that it's permanently only going to charge at night. And whereas when I'm doing daily time shifting, I have to use my batteries. Then I call seasonal shifting, and that's the process of accumulating any credits which I earn in the summer to be used the following winter. Now, just to get a sense of this, I'm using batteries. I've got a graphic here taken from my software, which is, as you can see, it goes from midnight till midnight, and about or exactly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you remember, the peak rates start at 4. I start a little bit early. I said I'll add an hour on there. And my battery, here's the state of charge down here, it starts to discharge, as you can see, as this time goes on until 11 o'clock at night. And that's when the ultra low starts. So that's when I start charging the batteries again at very low rates. And that's what these words really say, the blue curve. It starts discharging the battery. And let's say it ended up costing costing me really 28 cents instead of $2.80. And so that's part of the plan and the operations which I've been running the house under since January of 2024. Now, let's just take a look at what's happening from the home perspective. You see, what does the house really see? And where is it, what price is it paying for energy? And so we'll start at midnight, and you can see that there's a base load of some 300 watts, which are, refrigerators are going on and off, and goodness knows what all the wiggles are. But I do know at 6 a.m. that the water heater comes on for morning shower time, and that's what that peak is. And then the sun rises a little bit before 7 o'clock here, and it slowly picks up the load and delivers solar energy to the house, and there's no need any longer for energy from the grid. And this is my wife came back from playing tennis, and she put the heater on the hot water tank and had a shower, and and of course the sun provided the energy for the house until 3 o'clock, when the battery kicked in. And the battery is now supplying energy to the house. And here's another hot water heating event for doing dishes and things after dinner, and for evening showers. And of course, come 11 o'clock, and we have we're back on low rates, and the grid is supplying power and charging the battery as well. And you can see down here that the it's almost a third between energy coming from the battery, or from the solar array, or from the grid. It's just that it's spread out over time. Now, again, very busy graph, but I don't expect you to read the whole thing. But just from those words, if you take a look, usage, okay, that's how much I've bought, and this is generation what I sold. So if you look, ultra low overnight rates, look at 435 kilowatt hours, and it cost me $12. Whereas you know, the on peak, for reasons I cannot control, because I'd like to see that zero, because I don't want to buy any at the expensive rate, but it cost me $8, and that cracked through. Whereas you look at the generating side, I've managed to generate on peak 66 kilowatt hours, and that earned me $19. And if you look ultra low overnight rate, well, there was actually some, it's not zero, but it's a small amount of energy that was generated, and that really was first thing in the morning, just prior to or just after 7 o'clock, when I was getting solar energy, but not enough to offset the draw on the grid. And you can see the overnight rates. And if you you do a total, I saved $77, and I spent 32. And so if you say here, I'm going to count by month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I first started accruing, because this is what Hydro One does. They account and say, as soon as you start accruing and getting benefits that are credits sitting in your account, we're only going to let you do that for 12 months, at which time any that are left over, the grid, are going to take it off you at no further benefit to you. So what does this really mean? And this graphic is saying, well, here's this accumulated. As I said, I found out about in December 23, and had to wait for the billing cycle and administrative things. So I really didn't get started until January 24, and I didn't build up enough credits to pay the bill. So I was still paying out cash, the same thing in February and in March. But in April, I started to get benefits that exceeded the cost. And so this becomes, April 24 becomes month 1. And as you can see, my accumulated credits built until we get into late autumn and the winter, when I start spending them. And it turns out that the months are being counted, and it means by March of 25, I'm at month 12, and I still had $80, as it were, sitting in the bank. Well, utility canceled that, and they took it over, and the month 12 rule, but then the whole process started over again, and this cycle just repeats. Now, this, by the way, as you can see, it's a projection. It's what I model, and it's what I expect. But in fact, as we march along in real time, I'm getting the actual data that they're doing, and it's starting to go higher, by the way. And it means I'm going to come out here and probably lapse, $150 or $175 rather than 80. But we'll see how that unfolds as we get there. Now, we asked the question, Dave and I asked the question, what happens if this ultra low overnight rate was available back in 2017? And we are mildly disappointed that it didn't make a bigger difference, but this is what it's showing, that you've seen this graph already. And so this is a what if graph that says if over the years we had ultra low overnight rates, that would be almost $44,000 as compared to $38,000, which is a true number. But it does indicate that it makes a difference. Now, just want to talk a little bit about the mathematical model. Are there any mathematicians out there? As you know, we must balance supply and demand all the time, and we use energy trading. And I use two things. One, of course, is the home battery, and I use the electrical grid acting as an external battery. And so I do trading using these batteries, in quotation marks, becomes highly strategic. It says, when should you do what? And so this required designing and developing a strategy to, of course, reduce the homeowner cost and to make projections into the future. I have to use previous experience to predict what's likely to happen with these credits. And then I have to go and correct this prediction with actual measurements as it comes along. So I call this predictor corrector technique. And of course, I like to use AI to learn as we march along to help smooth the difference between prediction and correction. And as an example, I say, the energy flows and credits in December 24, I'm going to look back and say, well, as a first cut, it's going to be the same as what happened in 23. Of course, that's a rough estimate, because we know full well that the weather changes and there's multiple things which are happening, which are all nonlinear and what have you. But at least it's a first prediction. And then we have to apply a correction to reduce this uncertainty and things which are changing. And the measurements are come from Hydro One, therefore they are correct. And because they're the people that are keeping track of the energy credits. And that's what we're after, trying to follow that. Anyway, call that predictor corrector simulation, and it works quite well. What people ask, well, what happens if I don't have any solar? All I got is an EV that I can move to the ultra low overnight rate. So the question really is, well, are you driving 1,000 kilometers a month or 3,000 kilometers a month? And what does that really mean? And so I've just ran a quick simulation, and there's what is predicted, you know, going out over the years. And of course, if you are doing the same graph applies if you're using, you know, 2.5 kilowatt hours a day, and as you see, it's the same numbers, and and it says, look, you can if you can move loads to ultra low overnight up to 7.5 kilowatt hours a day, you can save about $100 a year. Now, what happens when you put solar into the equation? Well, we got to go back to the traditional home again, and here's David's utility bills in the blue line, and spread out over the months. And you notice I'm using months here rather than actual dates because of the 12-month rule, and because it doesn't necessarily start on 1 January. And and you can see that David's cycles are over a 2-year period are projected, and I'm projecting what his are going to be. We have actual data right up to here in this graph, up to month 5, and you can see that the utility was charging me roughly $200 in January, but by the time we got out till April and down here and May, that I was just paying connect fee. I had enough credits that I was paying for all my energy use, so I was only paying $36 a month. And of course, the math model predicts that my billings will be just the utility connect fee well into the future. And here's another way to take a look at it from Hydro One, and how this gets applied. These were the costs, of course, that David has been seeing, or pardon me, that I've been seeing under tilled or tiered under tiered billing history, and then what happens when it converts to ultra low overnight energy rate. And you can see the blue was going along, and then along comes 2024, and it dropped, and it's constant all the way. And you can see this orange line is the bill, the rise and fall of my credits, and of course the 12-month rule kicks in March, and I'm reset to 0, and I start again. And so time shifting energy loads to off-peak rates using ULO is a savings, but it's not highly significant compared to the trading benefits. By the time you add 5 kilowatts of solar energy, don't forget the rates of what you're charged when you're buying are the same rates that you get when you sell. Therefore, you want to sell as much at the high rate and not sell any at all at the overnight rates. And so this really falls into buy low and sell high in energy trading. And of course, the concept of adding more solar power, once your optimum is reached, it won't improve savings, as it's not possible to pay less than the connect fee. But there is, in fact, in some of the virtual power plants in the US, where the utility actually pays up to $2 per kilowatt hour for as a participation incentive for those microgrids and homeowners who wish to participate. And so that's another benefit that one, if when virtual power plants come along here, that we would look forward to seeing in the design of the system. And of course, the financial benefits, of course, I've already talked about how the homeowner can get down to the connect fee of $36 a month. And if the incentive participation of 2 kilowatt hours, some of the analysis done in the US that says, hey, this is roughly comes out about $600 a year, but there's some very complex rules in each jurisdiction and as to how that's all going to work. Now, the other benefit, of course, is the utility, who can delay upgrading the infrastructure as demand growth is reduced. And again, I have analysis from the US that have indicated that could help reduce annual power sector benefits by 35 billion by 2030. So it really is in the best interest of the utility to encourage virtual power plants. And of course, all customers and taxpayers, in fact, receive reductions both in not only their electricity costs, but also their tax rates. And in fact, the statement here of deploying 80 to 160 gigawatts of VPPs by 2030 could avert as much as $10 billion in annual grid costs, which do not have to be paid by customers and taxpayers. Now, should your community have one? Oh, yes. And so how do we go off and do this? And well, we're suggesting you can go off and collect an inventory of rooftop solar, electric vehicles, home batteries, smart thermostats, and anything that's Wi-Fi enabled switches within your community. Have some workshops and explain all this to those who are considering participating, and so they understand what the benefits are. And of course, work with the city, both political and staff level, as well as provincial and federal political parties and their staff, so everybody knows what's going on. And in fact, to even talk to local businesses to gather their interest to become a district system operator, or in fact to control the virtual power plant. Somebody has to do the administration, and then prepare a plan to go off and get some funding support. And so that is the end of my formal presentation. I'll turn it back to you, John.
I thank you very much, Art, for your clear presentation. And it was about more than kilowatt hours in megawatts, much more. Well, it had some of that, but we've got dollars ringing in our eyes here. So look, I'd like to go through the questioners in the order they came, and I'd like to ask Richard to put his screen on and unmute, and then I'd like to ask David Head to do the same, because as co-author of this presentation, I think you should get a kick at the can. Richard, over to you.
Okay, thank you, John. Actually, it's a two-part question, but the first and most important one, you say you meant 38,000, but is that taking into account the cost of the power wall, the solar, and any other components you have that feed into your power source?
Okay, the the answer is I'm trying to reduce that just to the cost of the power walls and the and the solar. I didn't throw in the ground source heat pump. I didn't throw in other ancillary things because I didn't consider that as really relevant. I'm trying to say, what is it you, the homeowner, could be looking at? And I do want to, you know, I do realize that that was cost back 7 years ago, and the costs have changed since then. And I'm certainly not an expert on what the cost would be today. I'm just telling you what I incurred.
But are you saying after your costs are paid for your power wall, your solar and all that, you still made an extra 38,000? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So that's
38 minus the 22. My 22 has to come out of the 38.
okay. So that's
Okay.
number one. And
Yeah.
the second part, when you said in the very beginning, the energy increase is at 2% every year until 2050. Is that because of AI?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons there. One is the growth of electric vehicles, it's the growth of AI, it's the expansion of industry, it's population expansion. There's many things happening here that
Yeah.
are driving demand, and AI just happens to be one that the media has latched onto and made a big thing out of. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. David Head, you're going to be up next, and I'd ask Claude Butner to turn his video on and unmute. Over to you, David.
One of the things I found very interesting about this is that most people don't think about money in terms of costs not spent. And yet this is the reality of it. If you have a traditional home and you move to a solar enabled home, you're not spending money. That money is in your bank to do other things. And yet that seems for some people to be a hard sell. Well, for me, it didn't seem terribly difficult, because if I have $500 in the bank that I didn't spend on Ontario Hydro, I can go out and have one hell of a good dinner.
Art?
Well, is that a question? No, well said.
Well, before I go to Claude, I'd like to note that one of the things that really struck me in this presentation was that you were able to compare two identical houses on the same street. One run the same way as most people's houses are, and one run with the solar, with the virtual power plant. Just give us a little. This is a club of friendly people. How did you two get to know each other and decide to collaborate on this?
Well, he happens to be a neighbor, and I'm out walking the dog, you know, and we get to know the neighbors here, and we started talking about energy and what I'm doing, because it's kind of hard to walk past my house and not see all the solar arrays, and that's a topic neighbors like to talk about, and one thing led to another, and we were mutually surprised that we had such detailed cost information that went back 7 years. And so it was a happy accident. I mean, these things happen sometimes, and it wasn't engineered, and we jumped on it, and hence produced those graphs and worked together in putting this presentation together.
I have a stepson whose birthday is on the same day as his wife's birthday. That's roughly a 1 in 400 chance. So the chance for you two being neighbors just a few doors apart is probably in the same order. Following Claude, I'd like to invite John Legg to turn on his video and unmute. Claude, over to you.
Okay, first of all, before I ask my question, I'll just refer to what Dave said. And it seems to me that is the problem, is that I have to take money out of my investments that are making, hopefully, some money and put it into my house. And that's the barrier that a lot of people face emotionally and intellectually. So a seminar like this that demonstrates the cost savings and that, you know, if you can have that deferred gratification, maybe you make a little bit less on your portfolio, but at the same time, your future looks brighter. So, but my question actually is, as my background, my virtual background inside a yurt, I'm very interested in small spaces because there's a lot more people who live in small spaces across the globe than there are that live in suburban houses of generous size. And we know, Art, from other times you've given presentations, that over the years you have a lot invested. And that works very well because in times of trouble with the grid, you can actually keep 3 households going. And so I think it's very interesting that this $38,000 is now coming out of, well, how about the next house? What would that cost? So I'm actually interested, and I put a link, by the way, into room heat pumps, which would be the main load of I guess the concept that I'm trying to go for is microgrid as appliance. Even a renter in a studio apartment could benefit from having a microgrid. And is this being under development, which I was actually very pleased when I attended that webinar that I linked, because of the development in New York, I guess, in New York apartments, that the heat pumps for small spaces is actually quite well developed. And in batteries, I think the big thing, at least I'm familiar with our state laws, as soon as you bolt it to the wall, it becomes part of the house. It is not an appliance. It is part of your infrastructure, like plumbing, and you can't remove it when you sell the house. So that's a long-winded way of saying what is the likelihood that this would work for, and I use as an example, 750 square foot tropical home in Latin America. What would the price point be for that kind of a house?
I think I could probably give you a not terribly specific answer, because the problem comes down to what the home uses in power, how the utility structures their rates, and if you know that, then you can do using Art's mathematical model, you could figure it out. But it's going to be very idiosyncratic, depending upon at least those two factors.
I think I as well, what you're hinting at, and my mind immediately jumped to the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-op, OREC. And that is a company in Ottawa, and that has a number of clients. They go off and they buy a wind farm or a solar farm, and they sell energy to the, or pardon me, they have a number of investors. People kick in $5,000 or 15 or whatever it is, and to help buy the windmill. And then they get dividends based on sales of power to the grid. They also, many of these investors, in fact, have solar on their roof. Some of them even have batteries and what have you. So OREC has gone off and has done exactly as we're recommending. And in fact, an earlier version of this presentation was made available to them. And they thought it was such a good idea that they've gone off and tried to implement that by having a community battery, because the battery becomes a big thing, as well as community solar. which could be sold to any investor, whether you're in an apartment or a standalone home. It probably doesn't really matter. And you
around,
would get the benefit as well. And so they are working with the Ontario energy uh, regulator to, in fact, get some development money to go off and implement a pilot program to demonstrate the feasibility and that it can be done. So once we see something like that, where we have a virtual power plant which is community owned with a shared battery, a big battery, you know, one of the ones that fit in containers that you see from Tesla, as being a community battery, as well as a solar farm and potentially a wind farm thrown in there as well.
so implied in your answer actually is that you don't think it's scalable downward. Because what you've just described is a big institution with investors, and now it's a quote unquote instrument of investment, and it's the tail wagging the dog. And I'm more interested in what is the state of the art in the near run and under development on the smaller scale, when you're interested in survival in, for example, one corner of your house, not the whole house.
Yeah, and we're back to David Head's response. It says, you know, what is the local utility going to do, and what are the local installation costs?
I might say, I wouldn't say it's not possible. It will very much depend upon the willingness of the utility to structure the rates to encourage it.
Yes, and because they're helping you pay for it. And that's what I'm getting at, is that when someone is not helping a small person who doesn't have a lot of money at their disposal, but is still interested in being somehow resilient, no matter what happens to the grid or the temperature. It's at this present time, there's not a lot of space in there. Things aren't being developed for that person. It's being developed for the larger end. And maybe that's right for the state of development. But by asking my question and being somewhat dissatisfied with the answers, I'm implying that I think we need to take another look and develop batteries that are appropriate and work on the concept of resilience as an appliance that can go with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Thank you. John Meyer, as John Legg takes the floor in a moment, please turn on your video and unmute. John Legg, over to you.
Thank you, John. And Art, you have done such an interesting analysis and such a clear exposition. It's given me ideas which I suppose may already are being looked into. So here's the question. The ease with which you talk about the variability of electricity, the cost of it, and the rates that are used for its payment means that this expertise could be used, for example, on the market to make money for operators of large buildings. I live in a building that is just under 200 units, and it's managed by another one just down the street, which has 300 units. Seems to me, unless there's an analyst of your caliber working with those people, there's a heck of a lot of savings that could be done by operators of large buildings. What do you think? That's not a particularly original idea, but which you have prompted by your clear and tempting exposition.
Okay, what's happened in other jurisdictions is there's this rise of entrepreneurs who become aggregators. They in fact work with building owners, like you say, And they work, in fact, with people who own windmills, and they work with others and people who have batteries, and they might get their own battery and put together, they aggregate together to make their own virtual power plant. Because typically you're quite right, it requires some expertise, it requires bookkeeping, it requires lawyers, it requires, secretaries and an office, that sort of thing, as you get bigger, and to keep track of the money flows and who's getting paid and what have you. So hence there is a role for these aggregators that are the entrepreneurs that fill that spot. Typically in a big building like yours, John, the each unit has its own electricity meter, and but yet you got a fairly small area on the rooftop, put solar, and perhaps not enough to really make it worthwhile. And the concept of a battery, could you put one within your unit? Possibly not. And so it goes, and it just becomes quite cost prohibitive. Therefore, you go to one of these aggregators, and they worry their way through all that.
Thank you. Very good reply. Thank you.
Thank you. So as John Mayer takes the floor, Ted Manning, will you unmute and turn your video on? Over to you, John.
Okay, I'm having a. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm having some grounding issue in my USB port, but a general point. One of the difficulties we have with this kind of conversion that Art has done, development, is that people don't think in terms of energy. One of the reasons they don't is that they get energy in different forms, natural gas, oil, propane, and electricity. We're talking here only in electricity. Kilowatt hours is very simple, but it's not a simple process for a lot of people. That's one of the issues. And the other issue is that so far, I don't think we've discussed geothermal storage. The house that I built in Parry Sound, I put a 7-inch pad in it. And when I sold it, just when I sold it to the people, this 2.8 cents overnight rate came down, and I said, heat up the pad. It's 80 cents. 3 kilowatts for 8 hours is about 80 cents or something like that.
Oops, we lost you.
We've lost your sound.
Anyway,
Wiggle the USB.
yeah. So we did get his geothermal portion, and I can respond a bit to that. We can't hear you, John. Sorry.
Art, would you like to take over?
Okay. I guess I'm aware of what you've done on geothermal, and I applaud you. I really do. You're one of the few folks that has, and to see the benefit. I also have gone and played with heating up the local ground conditions, and in fact that makes eminent sense in terms of energy storage, and that works quite well. I'm kind of looking forward to this winter when the demands on heating the house are non-zero. Right now they're sitting at 0 and we're not doing anything, and I'm going to play with storing overnight energy actually in the ground to heat the local ground conditions, and recover it when the costs are higher. And so, yeah, I've got some experimentation I'm going to do, and I'll try and keep track of costs and be able to report on that at another time.
If I can jump in as well, I'd say that the interesting thing here is if you have the intention to invest in a heat pump or a ground source heat pump or geothermal storage, what you're essentially doing in terms of Art's mathematical model is reducing the total demand, which means that on your that you would draw from the grid, which means that if you wanted to cover that with solar, you just need smaller solar panels.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I ran into the locker room for an equipment change here. So anyway, the other point I wanted to make was that here in Nova Scotia, I'm renovating a house. My new build is being difficult, and I put about 6 kilowatts on top of a 100-year-old house, and I went energy positive in about 2 weeks ago. So now I'm saving up energy. This is Nova Scotia. And they will hold the energy for you and you get it back at the same rate, but there's none of the back and forth. You get paid at a certain rate at different times. So they've got a very simple model here, and which is great. But it's something that can be done, and the house is doing much better than I thought it would. I did put in a heat pump, but it's just doing much better. And if I break even on the year, I'll be extremely happy. I expect to keep on banking energy till the end of October, but then November and December come in and possibly fog for a couple of months. So this is the high point as far as I'm concerned. But geothermal, we need to, in the northern climate, we need to understand geothermal is a great option. And we need to break energy down into the simplest possible form for people. Those are my points.
Okay, I just want to, you triggered a thought that said, why would you invest in solar when in fact you've got so many other types of energy that you can use? And of course I'm trying to put forward just the financial argument, but in fact there's lots of social arguments as well, and the concept of insurance when the grid does go down and you're not destroying all the food in your freezer and your basement isn't flooding because the sump pump doesn't work and all those other costs, and the insurance value alone is worth something, and I'm not trying to address that, but there are other social benefits as well, that when the grid did go down, for example, in our neighborhood, I was running electrical cords around to neighbors and helping them, so their sump pump would work and their refrigerated food wouldn't spoil, and etc. Is that of value? Well, yeah, I think so. Not direct financial value, not to me, but to my neighbors it was. And so there's a community benefit, yes, of course, and just how you can weigh all those in to making a simple financial decision is kind of tough. But anyway, there are many other benefits besides financial.
Thank you. Following Ted, Raymond, if you'd like to just jump in, do that. So it's over to you, Ted.
Okay, when I lived in New Zealand many years ago, many houses had a large piece of concrete sitting in their home. It weighed about 400 pounds, and during the night and other times when the power was cheap, they just heated this block It was not very effective heating. It was uncomfortable, but it was a means of doing so. The fact is that these things are very situational dependent. When I've been talking to people in Africa, we did a lot of work on the coastal Africa a few years back. The whole notion was that even bringing them benefits of communication and heating and health and all of that could be done with a very simple, small number of solar panels. And they didn't really have to store the electricity because they generally only wanted to use it in the daytime, although they did store some of it for reading at night. And they were not in it for heat. They were in essentially for the main benefits. And the places that I've done a lot of work with essentially tourism sites, people only go there during nice seasons. So all they really need is electricity to not heat or cool usually, or a little bit of cooling maybe, but essentially just to make sure you had light and cooking. And I feel almost the same way when I look at my cottage in Lanark, where I could easily be right off grid. They're charging me mainly to hook up to grid. I use almost no power. And I could just put one solar panel on and use it to cook and keep the lights on, and that'd be about it. And quite frankly, for 6 or 7 months of the year, that's not a bad lifestyle. So I'm coming back to the whole idea of, yes, each of these systems are very, very dependent upon the need and upon the conditions. And David, you probably don't have a lot of air conditioning and heating happening in the Galapagos right now. You didn't go there for that. And you probably would have a good time whether they actually had electricity or not. Very close to it.
Yeah, they use a lot of solar panels here.
That's right. And many of the places will. They won't in the Maldives because they think it's ugly. And we've been working like crazy for 20 years to try and get them solar panels that look like thatch or look like green. They just do not wish, because everybody flies in by plane. They fly over it and they suddenly realize they're living in a Glago glass factory and not in the glass huts that they'd spent a ton of money to go and have a good time. So it's very situational in terms of what people are prepared to pay for. If they want to be warm at night or cold during the day, they will pay differently. But I think art is really the lead of the charge to try and figure out how to do it right, even in some of the most challenging situations. So I give you a lot of credit for doing this. Somebody has to go first, and you have, and it's really good.
Well, I think, Ted, you're bang on it. It depends on not just the geography and the local situation, but the local culture and a whole bunch of other dimensions.
Right.
But and this gets back to, is it only a financial consideration? And clearly the answer is no. You know, there's well-being, lifestyle, and things that get in there, and in certain jurisdictions, that's what wins the day. Over the finances, and I'm only talking money. So yes, you're right.
Thanks you again, Art. Anyway, I'm finished. And Raymond, I won't answer your question because I'm not really sure what you mean. My metrics will change because if I don't heat in winter, I don't bother with anything. So that's what I really mean. If I go into Africa, they're not asking for something to keep their house at 70 degrees or 20 degrees year round. They just want it to stay between 10 and 35, and they're quite happy with that.
So I guess the answer then is it would take less solar to do the same thing. Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Okay, thanks.
Fair enough.
Okay. If there are other folks who have observations or questions they'd like to make, I'm going to fill in just a little bit, and then I'm going to invite David Head and Art Hunter to make whatever concluding remarks they would like to make. So just be ready to do that in a moment. Art, in particular, I have had occasional dealings with the management people in Ontario Hydro and Hydro One quite a while back. It struck me that these two crown corporations, well, one's a crown corporation and one's a municipal one, really knew their business quite well and ran their businesses quite well. Is that still the case? And can entrepreneurs like you deal easily and effectively, in your case with Ontario Hydro?
Well, okay, very good question, and I guess it depends a bunch on the utility that in your jurisdiction. But I do know that in Ontario, the Ontario Energy Board and the Minister of Energy is very much interested in saving money and not having to continue expanding this generating facility remotely, way remotely, and to help bring the generation and the consumption together locally, and hence save the resistive losses, etc. So they're very much on side. They're also looking at the long range energy procurement that they're confronted with a 2% growth in demand every year, and how are they going to meet that? And of course they're looking at all possible ways to do that, of which virtual power plants are one of them. And of course, distributed energy resources being another, primarily, those are solar and wind farms. But they're, quite frankly, they're also looking at, and putting batteries in, because you got to remember the grid is not uniform. There's, one geographic area will have bigger demands than some other, and how you run the cables around and the distribution, etc. It becomes quite complex, and so you want to strategically locate your generations, your local generations, and your local storage as well. But yeah, in Ontario, the IESO is very much on side, and there's no resistance, as it were, for virtual power plants from the existing grid authorities. Other jurisdictions may be different.
Thank you.
If I might add to that, John, we dealt with a couple of people not in Ontario who are interested, and in all cases, like in Alberta or in Georgia, it very much depends upon the interest of the people who actually run the system. In some cases, there's not an interest now. In other cases, their interest can be piqued, but they're a little bit behind thinking about it because they're very traditional in how they run their system. So again, it's something which is very much situational.
How much are they under the thumb of the politicians in their respective governments?
Oh, very much so. The Minister of Energy is the one that's running the electricity grid in that jurisdiction. So, yeah, and he's political. So, yeah, very much.
Yeah, ask Daniel Smith.
John Meyer, turn your video and unmute again, please. Richard, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 points. Art, I was a bit surprised at your response on the big buildings because, for instance, Toronto Western, Oakville, Trafalgar have converted to environmentally friendly or renewable energy. And for instance, Oakville, they have a big sign up in their lobby. They've saved over they expect to save over $20 million just by having converted. They've got solar on their roofs and so forth. That's a big hospital with a lot of energy demand. And as you know, I've been pushing for Ottawa Hospital to do the same thing. And we've had recent conversations with them, and it looks like they are maybe going down that route. The second thing I want to make, in terms of social benefit, the WHO, as many of you know from some of my postings, is that the WHO has said that the largest public health risk right now is climate change. So by doing something that converts us to renewable, we will be fighting that trajectory that we are following right now.
Thank you.
Okay, boy, I'm all on side when you talk about the health risk. And so, you know, I can only reinforce what you said. But I want to go back to the big building. And in fact, I was responding to John Legg, because I know he lives in an apartment building, an existing apartment building that is right next to another apartment building, etc. And they're very vertical and have a small roof, and there isn't a lot of land to do any other solar other than on the roof, and maybe some on the side of the house. When you talk about a hospital, this is normally a much bigger complex, particularly if you're just building it and you design it right from the get-go. Well, yes, there's many things you can do, particularly parking lots are very interesting, because you can put canopies over parking lots to generate electricity, etc. And yes, I understand that what's happening, and as you know, I've worked with you with the Ottawa Hospital to try and get a little more common sense put in there, and at design time, and of course it brings up the other thing that we've talked about, other sources of energy, and something which I'm very passionate about, and that is recovery of heat from wastewater. Both storm sewer as well as wastewater, and from buildings, because it is itself, just the piping system goes to every building in the city, and it's a highly engineered and intricate piping system, and it's collecting energy from the earth too.
Well, that's what Toronto
and
Western is doing.
And it's there, it's available, and why can't people use it? Well, it's not traditionally been used. That's the answer. But it's sitting there waiting, and it can be done. And it's happening, by the way, as you know, in parts of Europe and even in parts of Canada. Anyway.
Okay, John Meyer, please, if you would like to come back as the final questioner, please turn your video on.
Okay.
And now it's over to Richard van der Yap. If he still wants to do that, maybe he doesn't. Oh, yes, he does. Off you go, Richard.
No. I have already asked my questions. I think I've already pointed out. I've already made my points.
You had your money's worth. Okay. So I'm going to come to for closing. Okay. John Meyer.
Okay, I just wanted to say I calculated the scale in terms of dollars of the infrastructure in terms of solar, not wind, solar generation and battery storage. You'd need at various latitudes, and I know people will say, well, there's latitudes in Canada and latitudes in Europe, but basically in Inuit, say where you need 4 months of battery storage of maybe 60 kilowatt hours a day to keep a residence warm, and you need a very large solar array to charge that battery array. It worked out to $3 or $4 million per house. If you go down to Guadalajara, where you get solar virtually every day, and you don't have a heating system, your system cost is down to $2,000 or $3,000. So the northern areas are the ones with the really big demand, and both for energy and for storage. And that's why geothermal is so important, because you can store immense amounts of energy in geothermal at about a rate, if you're lucky, of 50% efficiency. And you can do things that you could never do with batteries. So that's my point.
Yep.
Thank you.
I concur.
Me too.
We're at the end of our 90 minutes, almost. Art was right on time with 45 minutes for his presentation. We don't enjoy that very often. And we're going to finish this conversation in another 45 minutes. So what I'm proposing to do is to go to Art first for his closing remarks, because he made the initial opening remarks. And I'm going to ask David Head to make the closing comments.
Okay, I would just like to say that the thrust of the presentation is a community, and clearly I would like to see community virtual power plants springing up all over the province, all over the city, every city, and to have a community of communities to, in fact, get rid of the need for any central power generation at any nuclear reactor or waterfall, you know, and to become totally independent and resilient. If that would be my biggest dream, and I'd be really happy to see this movement catch fire. And I think it's catching fire anyway without this presentation, but I'm just encouraging it along.
David Head.
In working with Art, I have found that the cost of being a tenant, and I'm a tenant, is that I would really like to invest in my building, but I can't because the landlord isn't interested. And so I continue to keep paying for gasoline, small car, natural gas, and electricity, and not getting anything back for that, quote, investment. And I think it's for somebody who doesn't have the dead weight of being a tenant, the chances of getting that your investment paid off for your house and making your house more worthwhile is really, to me, very attractive. And this has been a good project for me to be involved in.
I'm glad, we're all glad of that. So thank you. This was a wonderful presentation, and I'll ask Ted to close this session.
Well, again, thank both of you very much. This is something I think we're all very interested in, and we would all follow your footsteps if we could figure out how to do it, or at least to fund it. There is one point I'd make. I was at a conference a few years ago in France, a nanotech conference, and there were people there already talking about simply painting solar on the outside of buildings by putting two layers on and interfacing them. And they actually had working models. I have no idea how far that has gone, but I do know the industries I was working with, mainly again in tourism, were looking to make it work without changing what it looked like. And in some ways, your building manager probably feels the same way. So we can come up with easier ways for them to do it, and every bit helps. That is going to be a very positive step that we and the Club of Rome and the Canadian Association and all of our members can in fact help make work. So thank you again for another one of our very interesting presentations. And I would again say, please subscribe, please belong, please pay your dues. We're about to come out and ask you to do that anyway. And also make this keep happening, because every one of these presentations has been worthwhile, and we wish to keep that happening. So we are now going to let you go. You can turn on your stereo and your video, and we can talk for a little longer if we wish to pursue this further. So again, thank you again. Thank you for coming to CACOR Live, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.